Hi, this is Heather Jerome from heatherjerome.com and from the Sonatas and Partitas.com. This video is about articulation in Bach's music. Now, actually, I made the video last week, but I'm realizing it's too long, so I'm going to separate it into part one and part two. Part two is going to deal with the actual music. We'll look at Bach's music, we'll look at his scores and some of his markings and see what we can glean from that insofar as articulation. There's also a fair bit of information from people in his time, before his time, and even in our time about articulation. So in that second part, we're going to look at all that and hopefully get some inspiration and some information as to how we can use that in our own playing as performers. Now, the part one of this video, I'm actually kind of excited about it. It discusses kind of like the prehistory of what we now consider articulation. And it actually has a fascinating beginning that you would never imagine, that we all take for granted right now. And so the first video is going to show this history and show kind of how it fits into our, present day life and understanding of music, and maybe give us a bit of a deeper understanding as to how it was back in Bach's time. So I hope you enjoy these videos. As always, feel free to let us know what you think at sonatasandpartitas.com. And also, if you'd like to find out when new ones are uploaded, just subscribe to this channel and turn on your notifications. To start off, what does articulation refer to? In its most basic sense, you could say that articulation is the act of rendering vowels and consonants. So we articulate to make words, make clear words. And if somebody's articulate, they have like the gift of using the right word at the right time. So it's all about words and speech. And in Bach's music, we say that music speaks. And a lot of people nowadays even prefer to refer to music of that time as rhetorical music rather than Baroque music. So I found a thing about articulation in Donington's book here, talking about shaping the line. He says the first stage in shaping the line is to sustain the flow of sound with no interruption which is not meaningful. The second stage is to inflect the flow of sound with articulation or other modifications which would mold it into meaningful patterns. So basically, he's advocating to start with a continuous sound and then inflect it with modifications. Now, let's look at history a little bit farther back. The earliest time that I know of where people started talking about articulation was with Caccini and his friends Monteverdi, Zarlino, and Galilei. Now, Caccini wrote a manifesto called, excuse my Italian, Le Nuove Musiche, the new music. Now, the main point of this new music was that the music should support the words. I mean, isn't that obvious? It's just so obvious to us now, but the reason why it's that obvious to us is basically it's a testament to how effective Caccini and his friends were with spreading the word of their new idea. And so I have another little thing to read here. So this is from Nicholas Harnoncourt's book. This book was originally written in German. I have a French translation that I'm going to translate as I'm reading, so I hope I'm being accurate. So what Harnoncourt says is that to understand just at what point this was new, we should put ourselves in that time and imagine what it's like that, let's say we're about 30 years old, the only thing we've ever heard was the madrigals of Marancino, the young Monteverdi, who was writing madrigals in 5 to 8 voices, and the Franco-Flemish music. And the polyphony in that music was complex, and it supported the meaning of the poetry, it supported the emotion of the poetry, but it completely obscured the words. And so in that group, Galilei, who we now know mostly as an astronomer, but he was part of them, he actually wrote a tutorial. And basically his tutorial was that composers should go into the town And they should listen to all kinds of people speaking in all kinds of manners. So big people, little people, rich people, poor people, sick people, healthy people, happy people, sad people, angry people, in love people, and write down what it sounded like. It's just a matter of exaggerating it a little bit and writing it down. Now, Harnoncourt points out that the Italian language is already so musical that it was sort of obvious for Italians to be doing that. But I also think that maybe that seems like it to us now. Not that Italian is necessarily a more musical language, but actually what happened because of that is that music became an Italian language. But regardless of that, the main purpose is that these people went out there and they codified it. And they codified it into this lexicon of little, what they called figures. And all those figures had names. There were hundreds of them. And they went into the standard musical language. And so, let's see, here in this book, Bruce Haynes, The End of Early Music, he's got some of those figures. There's the suspirans. First, how Bach uses it in the C major allegro. Or this way. There's the accentus. And some of them, like anticipatio, made their way into our non-harmonic tone vocabulary. And there's also the syncopated version of the anticipatio. And actually, Bach uses a syncopated version of the anticipatio and the accentus side by side in the Adagio from the G minor sonata. Now, also in this same book, The End of Early Music by Bruce Haynes, there's a quote by Matheson from 1739, Matheson being a friend of Bach's. He says, "Many might think then that we have used figures and such like for so long now without knowing their names or meanings, we can be content to put rhetoric on the back burner. These seem even more absurd than the bourgeois gentilhomme of Molière, who had no idea it was a pronoun when he said I, you, he, or that it was an imperative when he said to his servants, 'Come here.'" So here we can see that Matheson he's very familiar with these figures. He's he's an educated person. He knows their names. He knows what they mean. And he's frustrated that that knowledge of the actual nomenclature of them is dying away, even though people use them all the time, the same way people use I, you, he a lot of times. I mean, all the time. I like to go back in history even farther now to look at another aspect of articulation and what it might mean for us. So when I was a student, we were taught that the first music that we know of was from the Greeks, and that they had their sung stories, which were the odes, and they were accompanied on the lyres. And so you could imagine that if someone's being chased by a cyclops, they might play something like that. And if there's everyone's finished being chased by a cyclops and they're in their caves going to sleep for the night, they might play something like this on the lyre. So it's like essentially what we have there is program music. Now, the other kind of music, the next thing that we learn about is music in the church, the chant. And if you've ever been in an ancient cathedral, you'll know that unless you're standing right beside someone, if they're talking at a normal volume, at a normal speed, you can't make out the words. So they chanted them so you could hear them. Well, there was another kind of music that was going on alongside of that was never written down, but a few people wrote about it, and that's dance music. And so sometime in that time period, along comes the violin. Now, the violin was used in dance music. The dance music at that time was, by all accounts, quite primitive, very percussive, and the violin was used
The bow was used to hit the string. So the violin was basically used as a pitch percussion instrument. But it was a violin. Like, it had the violin shape, it had the F holes, it had the 4 strings. And then in time, people realized they could drag the bow across the string. So you started having this dance music with rudimentary melodies. And sometime later, along come the Amati brothers, the younger ones, because their grandfather made the first violins. But these 2 younger brothers, who arguably still haven't been surpassed as violin makers, and then along comes Corelli, and Corelli develops the sonata. Well, the sonata was, up until then, there was like music that you sing, music that you dance to. There were also the fantasias and the variations, but the sonata was music for more educated folk, and it was basically just music just to listen to. It didn't necessarily, have the purpose of making variations on a theme, which was a known theme or something like that. It was just a sounding. But the thing about the sonata and about Corelli is that Corelli was born into a time when, after this manifesto, and after people were using these figures for about 50 years, and Corelli writes the sonata using these musical figures. And educated listeners all knew these figures. They knew what they stood for. They knew what they meant. And so now here with Corelli, in a sense, we have the birth of like a purely rhetorical music. It's not like Caccini's music that was rhetorical and there are the words and you can really understand the words. Here's Corelli's music, and it's just music that speaks to you. And so it's into this culture that Bach was born. And then Bach is in his 30s and he writes the Sonatas and Partitas.
So as mentioned before, I'm dividing this video in 2. So this is the end of part 1. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you found something to learn from it. If you want to be notified when part 2 comes out, please subscribe to the channel, turn on your notifications. And as always, we always welcome feedback at the sonatasandpartitas.com website. Thanks for watching.